I got an interesting question for you. I don't know if
Who are
I've
you
ever asked
talking
you
to?
this. You.
Okay.
I'm talking to you.
All right.
Not to our listeners. I'm talking to you, Thom Rainer, my dad.
Yeah.
Interesting question for you. I don't know if I've ever asked this. If you could go back in time, where and when would you go?
Mm,
And let's take the whole Jesus thing out of the equation. I know it's a big deal. Yeah, I want to go walk with Jesus. I want to see that. Sure, like that's a given. All right, take that out of the equation. Where would you go?
well, that's a broad question, but I'm gonna give you a very specific answer.
Okay.
I would go back to the day before I met your mother.
The day before.
Hmm.
Okay.
Because if I did that, then I could make everything with our relationship better, knowing all the mistakes I've made.
Hmm. Okay. All
So
right.
from the point I met her till now, dating 6 years and being married 47 years, I would go back roughly 53 years.
Okay. Okay. That's if that's what came to mind first. That's kind of cool.
I
Uh,
don't know where you're going with this, so I just
you
we
know,
obviously, folks. By the way, thank you, YouTubers, for watching us. I appreciate this, and thank you for listening on your favorite podcasting app. I'm trying to figure out where my son is going with this, but let's listen to what he has to say.
here it is. Just give me a second. Just give me a second. Here's your segue. We're going back in time today. We are looking in the rear view mirror
Yeah.
of the church for the past 6+ years. And so I was looking at looking at the notes and looking at where we're going. I was like, we're going back in time. So it just kind of brought it to mind. Where would you want to go? For me in particular, I'd go back to World War II. I would just watching the
Oh, you get
heroes.
to go back beyond your own life, is what you're saying.
I just said in time. I did. There was no.
That's true. That's true. That's
There's
true.
no parameters. I just said if you go back in time, where would you go? I was just kind of curious because that's what we're doing today. We're going back in time with the Church Answers podcast. We're going to be looking at today what has happened over the past 6 years, particularly with the attendance trends. And with that, we're going to be doing some slight analysis of where we are and how we got there. And so I was just thinking, where would you go? Where would you go? But welcome to the Church Answers podcast. If you are listening, my name is Jess Rayner. I am with my dad, Thom Rainer. We love coming here and talking about practical church issues. We love talking about where the questions are and what needs to be answered in regards to the church. And so we're excited to be here. We do want to start off by thanking Channing Associates. They're one of our great partners. And they have a heart, especially if you're a church leader. They have a heart for you to lead. They want you to have the capacity to lead. And so let them handle the finances. Let them handle the numbers. Decades of church experience. They're church accountants. They understand the church. They speak our language. They're ready to do anything you need. They tailor every solution to every size church. They believe in stewardship. It matters. They know your time's your time is precious. It matters. And so they want to help you go back and help you lead your church. So if you have any accounting, finance needs, if you are just wanting to spend more time leading your church and not spending so much time looking at spreadsheets, go check out Channing Associates. They are one of our partners. We'd love for you to check them out. So we're going back in time today, and we're going back and we're looking at the church attendance trends in America. What sparked this for you? Why did you want to go back and look at this?
Because attendance numbers have been grossly erroneous almost all of my life. And I have discovered that. I'm talking about in the aggregate, maybe in individual churches, but certainly in the aggregate. And I want to go back at least to the year before COVID,
Mm-hmm.
start making some corrections based upon harder data. We can't say ours is perfect,
Right.
but harder data. And there's another little piece that's going on. I bet you never read Real Clear Politics, do you?
Only during typical big election cycles, but beyond that, no.
I get that. Most people do not. I don't read the realclearpolitics.com more than 2 or 3 times a day. So I'm not
Okay.
as much more frequently during elections. One of the things they do that I think is most helpful is they take all the polls, whether it's the recent presidential election or other elections coming up, and they give you an aggregate of all the polls. They put them all together. It's the real
Hmm.
clear politics indicator. So
Hmm.
you're not depending upon just one. I have my favorite pollsters that I go to as my number one choices. But if I just want to try to get a blend of everything that's going on, I go to them. So I have begun. Franklin's helping me, but I have begun aggregating attendance numbers as they come in from different sources.
Okay.
And with Franklin's help, we're building the Church Health Insights project. That's what he called it, Church Health Insights Project. He liked the name CHIP, so
Uh,
uh,
mm,
makes sense.
it
And
does.
so Franklin has started building it, and I want to give as accurate as possible numbers. It's always been a challenge of mine to see numbers, and I know that they're not real. They're far off, and I've seen that for years. And so my desire was, okay, let's go back in time and let's begin to do that. And hey, before I forget it, I got to mention this. Cheney has a new link that we
Mm,
want to connect them to.
that's right.
Our audience, CheneyAssociates.com/partners/church hyphen answers. Look in the show notes.
Yeah, that's easier. Just look in the show notes. We got the
Look in
link
the
for
show
Cheney
notes and
Associates.
connect there. The reason we want to say that is because Cheney, just like anybody else, likes to see how many people are interacting that have clicked on to their site.
They want real clear data,
They
just
want
like
clear
you
data.
like real clear politics, just like we're trying to get real clear attendance trend numbers here.
So that's the issue. And you know me. You've known me all of your life, and I've known you all of your life. But you haven't known me all of my life. But you know me well enough that I am fascinated with data. I'm fascinated with statistics. I'm
Hmm.
fascinated with numbers.
Right.
So there,
And they
there
tell
you go.
stories, and that's the important thing. You like to know the why behind it. You like to know the reason behind it and what story it tells. So let's go back in time. You from 2019 to 2024, you have determined the median worship attendance in the U.S. And real quickly, give us the what median means. For a lot of people, it can mean different. You have averages, you have mean, you have median, and not to go too far down this math route. But real quickly, define what median is for us.
Median is a halfway point.
Okay.
So if you have, let's say, 11 people and you've got their age, and you want to line them up, and you're going to put that middle person, that person that is right between all of these others,
Hmm.
right there in the center. Everybody to the right of that person is going to be older. Everybody to the left is going to be younger, 5 on each side. And then that person becomes the median. It's
Right.
very different than averages.
Hmm.
And I have resisted the temptation to fuss at people who use averages for aggregate data for churches, because a church with an attendance of 10,000, which there aren't many of, is really going to skew the averages. So let's do the
Right.
median. What's that
Right.
midpoint? So
Right.
that's why I do median.
Yep. So each year, starting in 2019, we're looking at the median size church, or really, well, median worship attendance in a church. And so this is that midpoint, which means 50% of the churches were larger, 50% of the churches were smaller in size. So let's start with 2019, with the median worship attendance US was somewhere in the range of 120 to 130. So we're back in time looking at pre-pandemic, pre-COVID. Give us a snapshot. What's going on in the church at this point?
Well, for one thing, going back to my disposition, most churchgoers think that the average church size, that's another thing, polls and what they think. They think the median, I said average, but they call it average. They think that the median church size is around 300 at this time.
Hmm. In 2019.
In 2019, and
Okay.
the median is somewhere between 120 and 130. There are a lot of reasons I want to start at 2019, as we said right away. That's
Hmm.
the earliest point that we can get to prior, or the latest point we can get to prior to the pandemic, and I want to see what changes we can see have come about as a result of the pandemic, at least from a correlated factor.
Hmm.
But this number was a lot smaller than so many people indicated. Now, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
It's really a yes or no.
Okay.
Have you ever heard this piece of data? 80% of all churches in the United States are declining or plateaued.
I can't recall.
Okay. That
Probably,
means
but I can't recall that I've heard it.
Well, that means you're not as old as I am.
Okay.
That's what everybody said 10, 15, 20 years ago.
80% of churches were plateaued or declining.
Climbing.
4 out of 5.
4 out of 5. And based on what?
Since I haven't heard it, I don't know.
Okay. You're exactly right.
It just came. Someone said it, and it became an urban myth.
Yeah, and some organizations actually built their companies around them. The 80-20 principle. Here's how to break out of being part of the 80 and get into the 20. And when I wrote a blog post on this and talked about dispelling the myth of the 80-20 just based upon data, whoa, I got a lot of pushback. I mean, I
Okay.
got some angry people. I think that they had kind of bet their reputation and maybe their business that 80-20 was a real number. I'm not trying to be contrarian to them. I'm just saying we've got bad data, Jess.
Okay.
And so I start off with 2019.
So the perception was worse, is basically what you're saying, than most people thought.
A
They
lot
thought the
worse.
churches were bigger. But are you saying that many weren't declining as much as they thought? Are you saying the 80-20 is not real? In which way?
I am saying that there were more churches declining, so it would have been above 80 than the 80-20.
Okay. So it could have been 90%. We don't know for
Could have
sure,
been.
but
Could
it
have
was
been.
higher than 80%.
Here's the fact on it. I cannot find a single study, accurate study, database study that can tell us how they got 80-20. That's the main thing.
Okay, so here's what I'm putting in my own words, and tell me if I'm wrong, because I'm much more of a not as intellect as you. In 2019, the
You're a nerd.
perception of the church is much greater, even to the point that the people who were sounding the alarm weren't sounding the alarm loud enough.
That's exactly
The
right.
decline was worse. The attendance numbers were worse. What was really happening in the church, no one really knew about it. And so in 2019, everything feels good, everything seems good, people think things are going well, but in reality, the decline had already started and it had been going down. I don't know from what numbers before. We're not looking beyond 2019, but there's a misconception or a misperception of what the reality of church is.
Exactly. And when you have an over inflated view to the positive, what does that mean? That means urgency goes away.
Hmm.
That means that the church is not doing some of the things it should be doing and is doing some things it should not be doing. It just means that you are basing your reality off of false data and statistics.
Mhm.
And it bothers me primarily because of the lack of evangelism in churches. It's not the attendance, but the lack of evangelism. Why do we need evangelism? We're
Right.
healthy.
Right.
We're really healthy.
I mean, I've heard it for years that cultural Christianity was dying. That's been around for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But what I hear you saying is that come 2019, that was still, oh, it's dying. It's dying a slow death. Well, maybe it had far progressed than what we had thought.
And here's what would happen. Church leaders and some church members would say cultural Christianity is dead. And he'd be talking about those people. It would not be talking about that specific church. It was more what's out there than what's happening at my church. To be clear, some churches were dying then.
Right.
Autopsy of a Deceased Church was about to was still a good seller in 2019, still a good seller today, better seller today.
Hmm.
But the reality of it is, we thought we were a lot better than we really were in our churches.
Okay. Then comes 2020. The COVID March, what was it? March 16th, 13th. Oh, I forgot the day when that NBA game shut down. That was the domino that fell. The
That,
NBA said no, we're not having it. COVID's too much, and it was the Jenga tower. Dominoes is probably not the right visual. It was the Jenga tower. It was that piece came out and everything started crashing down. COVID entered in March of 2020.
exactly. I think I've told you the story about where I was when I had this awareness. I'll tell it again because you're looking at me like I'm not sure I remember.
I
So
listen. You're my dad. There's something as a kid you just tune out a lot of what your dad says.
I understand that. I understand that. Well, I was meeting with Mark Clifton.
Hmm.
We were recording podcasts together in my office in Franklin, where I was at the time. And Mark kept yawning. I said, "What's wrong with you?" He said, "Oh man, I was at a basketball game last night and I had to hurry to get over here. It's an NBA game. Can you believe it? They made us go home." I said something about people being sick.
He was there.
He was there, and the next day he's in my office breathing in my face.
Oh, that's hilarious. I did not know that. I didn't realize he was at that NBA game. I don't even remember which one it was, but yeah. So that's when we entered into the world of COVID in 2020, and that's when churches started going, well, what do we do? How do we respond? Uh, what happened to the median worship attendance in 2020? What was the effect of that? Where the number drop? Where did it drop to?
Okay, I'm just going to say it was at 125 and it dropped to 80. We have a range here on 75 to 100 because I have different studies. But just for simplicity for the listening and viewing audience, I'm just going to say 125 to 80
Okay.
is where it dropped. Now, what is taking place then is that churches begin to get aware that something is going on. But there's some prelude to this. I remember the first online service I ever saw. It was with you and Tyler.
Oh, we were a slow adopter when it came to live stream at my church. I don't know. For some reason, it just never became a priority. And there we were that first Sunday, had zero live stream equipment, no cameras, no microphones, nothing. And we opened up my laptop in my office, the
I
same
remember.
office I'm in right now, and
Yes.
opened it up and had our first live stream in the middle of a building renovation, building construction. And I remember that we had a quick devotional, and I took the church on a building tour of the construction. That was our first live stream. It's probably still on YouTube out there. It wasn't glorious by any means. Okay, but that was your first live stream as well.
That was my first live stream, and for some reason, I cannot forget it. I guess
I've tried.
But that was my first live stream. Live stream became very important. You remember what the big numerical question was? How do you count online attendance?
Right.
Hey, if you have one view, does that mean you can multiply it by 3 because there may be 3 people using the same device?
Mm-hmm.
And so they were sticking around for about 10 seconds, and there's probably one person, but they counted them as 3 for the whole time. And
Right.
that's another story into itself.
Right.
But it is where online attendance and online viewing became, for a season, normal. It
Right.
became what we did while people were not doing COVID. And then when they regathered, they looked around and they said, and a typical response was 20% of our people aren't here, or even more.
Right.
Even when it settled down, it got to 20%. So the perspective was twofold on this, Jess. One perspective was, okay, online attendance is where we're going to go. We need to accept that as a reality. That did not happen.
Right.
The only people that watch the church at Spring Hill, I don't know this, but this is just hypothetical. Only people that watch the church at Spring Hill are people who are out of town, sick, and your mother, because she watches. She goes to 2 live services and then watches you.
And Miss Margaret.
Miss Margaret in Bradenton as well.
Yeah. We don't. Our live viewership is smaller for sure. But we do have some faithful live viewers that are worshiping while we're worshiping there, and there are some, and yeah, a lot of it again, our live stream is mostly for guests, future future potential guests.
Which is how guests now decide whether or not they're going to go to a church. So they view the live.
And then a secondary reason is so that if people are out of town, people are sick, they can still participate with their church family. So those are our two primary issues. But yeah, it's not what we thought it was with the live stream. So the church is spending 2020 trying to figure out what do we do here? Mm-hmm. What's next? Mm-hmm. Is live stream the future? Do we need to go to smaller sites? What's happening? Hey, we're opening up our doors again, which happened at many different times throughout 2020. Some didn't even start till 2021. And then they're saying, hey, come back. And then they're looking, they're like, they aren't coming back.
That's right.
A
typical was 20% 3 months later, not just immediately. 20%
right.
are gone.
Right. I know we opened up in June and we were about 50%.
And that's not unusual.
And then it was by the end of the year, we actually got back to 100%. But it wasn't the same people that were there. We actually lost.
That was another reality. Mm-hmm. Our congregation changed during that time.
Mm-hmm. We did. COVID gave a lot of cultural Christianities the final permission they needed to not go to church anymore.
That is one of the best quotes I've ever heard.
Well,
Cultural Christianity gave them the final permission not to go to church anymore.
there we go. That's that. If anything, and there are pros and cons to that. And we're not going to go down that, but that's what happened. Is a lot of nominal cultural Christianity say, yeah, I don't need to go to church anymore. It's not important. And so what happened in 2020 is we saw that we saw a lot of people left the church that were nominally involved, that were probably most likely cultural Christians. And one, I'd love to have them back for different reasons. But that is the reality. And so 2020, the shakeup happened, and then all of a sudden 2021 hits, and you're still feeling the effects of it. There,
Yes.
as a pastor, 2021 was a crazy year for me personally. It just, everything that happened, you're trying to get your bearings again. But again, we saw a decline, not near as steep from 2019 to 2020, but we saw a decline. So what happened with the numbers, the median worship attendance in 2021?
It'd be good for me to say at this point, I am now beginning to bring in at this point other sources and depending upon them regularly for attendance data. And I'm beginning to aggregate them in my head, such sources as Barna, Lifeway Research. My favorite one is Faith Communities Today. If you haven't been to that one, they do sometimes 5-year and sometimes 10-year updates, but they're really, really good. They have the biggest database. And so I'm continuing to depend upon them, but I'm also looking at our consulting, coaching, and anecdotal information, as well as some of the actual hard data we're getting from churches. And Church Answers is beginning to contribute to that flow as well.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, what we see in 2021 is a continual decline. Some churches held on. Some that were 75 stayed at 75. Some that were at 90 went all the way to 78, 79. But the decline, as you indicated, was not as steep. But what was happening in 2021 was the expectation that the people would be coming back,
Mm-hmm.
and they did not. But
Yeah.
as you indicated in Church of Spring Hill, they did come back, the numbers, but not the same people.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think a lot of pastors are looking and trying to figure out what is their new norm. What is their reality? How do they begin to lead? What is the expectation? Um, there was a spiritual difference.
Hmm.
I do think the people that came back in 2021 were hungrier.
I
They
agree.
wanted community. And so, I'm looking at the numbers. Almost, I mean, it's almost a 50% drop from 2019 to 2021.
Isn't that amazing?
It, in 2 years' time, the median church size, worship attendance size in the U.S. almost dropped 50%. It's pretty close. You could say it did hit 50, depending on how you do
Which
the
one you
numbers.
look at. And what I've been watching on this, because this is the industry we're in addition to churches, I'm watching the parachurch groups, like Church Answers. We're a parachurch group. And I'm watching the greatest number of closures begin in these parachurch groups in 2021. Now
Hmm.
they're continuing today. And most people aren't recognizing that it's not only the churches themselves, but it's those who come alongside the churches, para, and work with them. Of course, denominations are declining. There's really only 3 denominations growing right now. One is Global Methodist, the biggest growth, because they are coming out of United Methodist and they're getting a lot of folks there. Another one is uh, Presbyterian Church of America, but it is so small, so incredibly small, that even though they're growing, you don't notice it that much. And there is one other one, Jess, that does not come to mind, but basically there are 3 denominations that are growing. But now we're beginning to observe something else as we move to 2022.
Hmm.
And in 2022, plateauing churches or declining churches now say, we're declining, we're plateaued.
Man,
Reality begins to hit in.
yeah. So and again, that's exactly what I was going to say. 2019, there was a false reality,
Mhm.
according to the numbers. And then in 2022, there's understanding of what the reality is. 2021, it was a weird year. I think for
Exactly.
pastors, we were exhausted. We had decision fatigue. Um, we were just, there's so much that we went through in 2020. We had to completely change how we led and shepherd our churches. 2021, we're like, we need a break. But
Yes.
here in 2021, the people are like, what are we going to do about the problem? And so you have this underlying tension, I think, in 2021 that a lot of pastors faced, that they were exhausted, they were tired. But the church was going, hey, we need more leadership out of you now, in a weird way, than we did in 2021.
Yeah.
Um, And so you have this tension, underlying tension that exists. Now in 2022, the pastor is going, okay, I've got to figure this out. I spent 2021 just recovering for the most part. Now there's a leveling out of, okay, yes, what are we going to do about it? Because we see the reality that's happening in 2022. The numbers, what would you say what the median worship attendance was in 2022?
I would say it was around 60 to 65. I have a range of 55 to 65,
Mm-hmm.
but looking at some different sources, I would say 60 to 65 was the median.
So really a plateau, 2021 to 2022. It's kind of like that. It just felt like that everything leveled off.
Things are slight now. Now we're beginning to, at Church Answers, see an increasing number of church leaders contact us for help
Mm-hmm.
for their declining church. So coaching and consultation all of a sudden picks up. It has not abated since then, and we're continuing. In fact, I'm leaving this podcast right now, and I'll be going south to do a major consultation. A major meaning is comprehensive. We're going to be doing several months of consultation with them. But the point in all of this is there was a wake up call in 2022, and most churches took that long to say there's something wrong with my church.
Mm-hmm. All right, so 2022. So 2019, false perception. 2020, this is the world was thrown into chaos.
Mm-hmm.
2021, realizing, oh my goodness, I'm tired. 2022, what do we do now?
What do we do now? And Jess, you've seen this because you do a lot of coaching with our uh, Church Consultation University clients. By the way, if you have not done Church Consultation University, I would encourage you to sign up for that to be a certified church consultant. We need more of you. Jess works as a coach for them and for Revitalize consultations as well. You've told us some of what I know is stories coming from you.
Yeah. 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 What do I do now? What's cool about Church Answers is we're always about providing those solutions as best we can about what do you do now. And one of the things too that we're partnering with is Upward. They're a great one talking about, what do we do? And obviously we're gonna be talking about evangelism here and reaching into the community. But I know you work with Upward. They got a new program focused on running. Is that right? That they
Yeah,
just came out with?
I'm afraid that you and your brothers tried to influence them too much because
Okay.
y'all are the only. Well, I'm the only Rainer male that does not run. I run from running, but they brought running to Upward. I really think it's a good move. They're talking about, hey, host a 5K challenge, have a run club,
Mm-hmm.
all these kind of possibilities. And what that is encouraging me about now, I've been working with Upward directly for about a year and a half now. Our organization longer. What that is encouraging me is Upward is now becoming this incredible path to get into the community.
Right.
What do we typically hear from church leaders? Oh, if one for the sports leagues, we could have 30% more. Well, guess what? You can have your own sports league.
Right.
And
Right. And Upward's great at that. So visit upwardrunning.com. Check them out. Again, that's what we're talking about. Just, Church Answers. We love providing solutions. We talk about church consulting, our certificate in church consulting. One of our partners, Upward, with upwardrunning.com. A lot of churches in 2022 were going, what do we do now? What are some of these solutions? And I think in a lot of ways, Church Answers, that's when we're like, how can we continue to help
yes,
these pastors? That then gets us to 2023. What is the median, according to your research, Dad? What's the median worship attendance in 2023?
for all practical purposes, we're at a plateau.
Okay.
I mean, I have 2022 at 55 to 65, and I have 23 at 50 to 60, depending
Mhm.
upon which study. You could say they're both at 60.
Okay.
You could say they're both at 50. 55 is the number I'm using with frequency, but it could be 5 or 10 the other way at this point. And so what has happened is we have a new reality, and that a median church is somewhere in the 50s or around 60.
Hmm.
And that's new news.
It is, and because the way, because again, you got to think about it. We're talking about the median, which is the church size in the middle. So 50% of churches are smaller than this,
That's right.
and 50% of churches are larger than this. And obviously, on the larger side, the scale is quite different. But the reality is, it's being felt for all churches, and they're figuring out this new norm. How do they operate? How do they address this? What's the declining attendance? And so this is being felt all across the board. But for a lot of these smaller churches, um, resources have changed.
Well,
It,
one of the big resources that has changed is, can we have a full-time pastor now? And many of the churches have said no. And some of the churches have a false reality where they say, "Oh, yes, we can," and the full-time package is going to be 18,000, including benefits.
right, and they're back in the 1980s and
Yeah,
1960s,
maybe
maybe
1960s with that
way
one.
back in time.
Yes,
So what's happened then is from 2019, false perception, numbers still high. 2020, the Band-Aid came off. Stark decline from 2019 to 2021, and then in large part, what we're saying is 2021, 2022, 2023, just everything kind of leveled off and plateaued. But it's still kind of the big question is what do we do next? Um, how what do we do? And so I feel like at Church Answers, the thing we often talk about is just community engagement.
hmm
It's it's
yeah.
get
But
it's
go back to what you were talking about with Upward. They get you in the community.
mhm.
So yeah, exactly.
So the question then is, has that happened? 2023, 2024. Um, hopefully that's what the pastors are asking. Those who are leading churches is like, what do we do next? Did that happen?
No,
Okay.
in large part, no. In exceptions, yes. The good news is some of our best relationships with churches were those who heeded our advice or heeded others' advice and started reaching into the community and saw positive results. Here, there's this passage that we say in Matthew 9, and it has this parallel in Luke 10 at our church every single Sunday. And basically, it is saying this: hey, there's this big harvest, but we need to start praying for workers into the harvest. That biblical reality is we don't have a scarcity of people to reach. We have a scarcity of people who are being disobedient, or who are being obedient
Hmm.
and not reaching the people. Christ made it very clear. Hey, the workers are few, but the harvest is great.
Hmm.
And
So what I'm hearing is that the church has to go back to the primary reasons we exist. Obviously, it's to give God glory. That's the ultimate primary reason. But then it's also to evangelize and disciple. It's to reach people and help them grow in their relationship with Jesus Christ.
first
Um,
thing that Jesus said as he was ascending to heaven, you will be my witnesses. That was his last will and testament. The first thing he said as he ascended. That means it was important. One of the last things he told his gathered disciples is go and make disciples of all nations. It was important to him. It's important to us. We are not seeing that happen in any large degree right now.
so the church is facing a bit of a, I don't want to say a problem. I guess it is a problem, but a bit of a challenge. And I think a lot of churches, if I had to guess, are still trying to find that silver bullet. They're still expecting the lead pastor to do all the work that's needed to take
Exactly.
place. But the church has got to mobilize across the board. Um,
Exactly.
it
Exactly.
each local church, each church family has got to get motivated. Because here's the reality: we don't have the numbers in for 2024 yet. Obviously, this podcast is happening at the beginning of 2025. But what's your projection of what happened last year?
Oh, somewhere around 50, just a slight decline again.
Okay.
So, 45 to 55, there's that range, but again, a slight decline. Uh, and Jess, if I could summarize the two big reasons, the two things that hurt the church the most,
Hmm.
all the way back from 2019 and even before, let's even go to the 1970s to 2019 to today. The two biggest things that hurt the church are the two things I'm going to talk about in the next podcast.
Okay. So that's a bit of a
We're going to go to the future.
stay tuned. Stay tuned. So we've been looking backwards, and we've been looking at the median worship attendance in the U.S. Based off Dad your research and partner. I know you have you work closely with Franklin and all his research, and so you have been working hard to figure this out, and it's painted a picture that most people feel, most people have felt, most people have probably known, but it's a bit not as encouraging as
Not as
we.
encouraging, but it does not have to be fatal to the
Right.
church.
There,
There's
there.
hope.
This can be turned around. This
Yeah.
absolutely can be turned around. And so we're going to talk about it in our
All right.
next episode. We're gonna look to the future, and we're gonna see about will this trend continue? Can it be reversed? Will it be reversed? My hope and prayer is that the answer will be yes, but we're going to talk about that in the next podcast. But before we wrap up, we do want to thank Cheney Associates again. Their heart is to take things off your plate if you're a church
Exactly.
leader, in
Do these
particular
things.
your finances and your accounting and your bookkeeping. So if you are looking for someone in 2024, or sorry, we're in 2025 now, 2025, to give you more time to maybe go out and evangelize, check out Cheney Associates, CheneyAssociates.com/partners/church dash answers. It's down in the notes. Click on that link. See if they can just help you out. They help out all different size churches. We're very thankful for them. They're going to handle the numbers so that you can go and lead your church. Any closing thoughts?
I am going to be going to the future. We just come into the recent past. I'll be going to the future. I have some hazy projections, but they're not all nebulous. They're not all unknown. And we'll talk about what the future looks like. And basically, there are two paths that you can go down. Which of the paths will your church choose? And we're going to talk about the two main reasons why we are where we are today.
All right. Well, I look forward to this one. Thank you so much for all you listeners out there. Thank you for you're on YouTube. If you're watching, again, we always love for you to hit those buttons, like, subscribe, notifications, do all those things. Make some comments if you're on YouTube. We'd love for you just to participate. Tell us what you think about what you hear. Add in some comments. We love that. We'd love to see that grow as part of YouTube. But thank you so much for listening. We look forward to seeing you in the next one.